Tuberculosis has been around for thousands of years, and it still represents a major global public health threat. While much progress in terms of prevention and treatment has been made against this respiratory infection in many countries, including the U.S., it continues to be an important disease of public health. And we want to know why and what the significance is statewide, including Orange County. Today we have with us from the Florida Department of Health in Orange County, Dr. Asim Jani, Executive Medical Director, Communicable Diseases. He's an infectious disease expert who's worked in public health for over 25 years. So you are the source. Why are we even talking about TB at this point on the calendar?
I'm so glad, Annetta, that you mentioned the historic nature of TB. TB is an ancient disease. It's been here for thousands of years. And what people don't realize is that a third of the global population is actually infected with tuberculosis.
This sounds like a pandemic.
It is an
epidemic?
It is a pandemic in that it is a worldwide epidemic, and that's what a pandemic is. And it has sort of been a continuous pandemic for hundreds and thousands of years.
Why? Well, before you answer the why, can you describe and define tuberculosis and how it impacts the body?
Absolutely. Great question. And it is fundamental to understanding the scope of this. Tuberculosis is a bacterial disease. We have infectious diseases caused by many different types of pathogens, bacteria being ones that fortunately we have a lot of antibiotics for, including for TB. TB is what we call a respiratory transmission infection. And many people now with COVID understand what it means to have a respiratory disease as opposed to other forms of transmission. The important thing about tuberculosis is that it is a disease that emerges many times and in many places where people are not socioeconomically well off, or they have had migratory experiences, or people have had problems with other illnesses that impair their immune system.
How infectious is it? Can you catch it from somebody else?
It requires prolonged exposure. So that means not a matter of minutes, but maybe days to weeks, often weeks to months, and close household contacts, for example, or workplaces or institutional settings such as prisons where there's very little mobility, the air is stagnant, ventilation may be poor, and people who are infected with the infection, with the disease, with the bacteria, actually are symptomatic with cough, night sweats, fevers, weight loss. These are the symptoms of tuberculosis disease.
That could sound like a lot of different things. So how do you know for sure?
Yes, so in fact, it does mimic many other infections. But one of the distinguishing characteristics of tuberculosis is that it's a chronic illness. So usually the illness goes on for weeks to months, and people often in the past and even now will have dramatic symptoms like coughing up blood because it affects the lungs. So bacteria, tuberculosis, is transmitted via people who are infected, and their air that they are breathing out, coughing out, is filled with this bacteria. It's breathed in.
Is it fatal?
It can be if it's untreated, certainly if it's undiagnosed and it goes on. Fortunately, about 50% of the time or more, it causes what we call lung disease, pulmonary TB. But sometimes it can actually result in tuberculosis in other organs. So symptoms are very important to detect. And
you said people get vaccinated.
So there is a...
Did I hear that right?
No. So almost. There is a vaccine called BCG, and it has been developed in the developing countries. It was used many places in the world, and it still is. It largely has effectiveness in reducing certain types of TB, specifically meningitis or TB of the nervous system, but it's in no way comparable to our regular vaccines. So in fact, it really is not that protective.
So what can we do?
Yeah, so what we can do is what we call in public health the 3T strategy. So think about TB, test for TB, and treat for TB. And let me go into that. thinking about TB involves people who are at risk or people who you may be working with or living with to see, are they at risk for tuberculosis? Are they perhaps having health conditions, immune deficiency syndromes, or do they work in places or live in places where the bacteria is endemic? Many times we know that Asia as a continent, Africa, Latin America, these are places in the world where endemic TB exists in large numbers.
What
So
about
we have
here?
to think about TB. Yes, so we still have tuberculosis in the United States. A lot of it is resulting in populations that have been born and raised from abroad, and then they come to live here. But we still have even what we call endemic TB in populations that are born and raised in the United States.
Okay, so the three
Think
T's.
about it. And then once you have any suspicion for tuberculosis, you need to test for it. Now the testing is very simple. If you actually have symptoms of tuberculosis, where you have cough and night sweats and fevers and things like that, then you want to collect a sputum and test it in the lab to see if the bacteria can be cultured.
Okay, and the final T.
And the final T has to do with treatment. And treatment is related to testing in a unique way. TB is one of those bacteria that you can get infected with, but it can remain latent and not actually cause disease in almost 90% of the patients.
So the testing piece is critical.
The testing piece is critical, and you have two different types of treatment, therefore. You have treatment for latent TB, which is the TB that's dormant.
Just kind of sits there. Okay.
And you can take a 10% lifetime risk of getting TB and reduce it to 1% or less. But if you actually have disease, then you have to treat it with many different drugs.
And all of this information is available.
It is.
Through the county health department.
And the CDC.
Very fortunate. The goal is to eliminate tuberculosis. As per the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there are many ways to reach this goal, including remaining aware of the ways TB can be spread, early detection of TB, symptoms, and prompt therapy to prevent disease onset and related complications. Thank you for joining us and learning more about tuberculosis.